Hey everybody, got an email or two from students who were looking for a little bit extra help. This is obviously, I'm guessing you've realized now through a few books into the Odyssey, the most difficult text that we've had to read this year. And so I understand that, and I wanted to just give you another source here in terms of this video. I'm going to walk you through a couple suggestions for strategies for reading again, a couple reminders, and then I have this book 9 study guide that I'm just going to go through some answers to see, if it kind of gels with what you understood as you read. Okay, but again, I want to acknowledge I know this is tough. Number one, I think it's helpful to listen. So if you have not accessed the online textbook and listened page by page as you went through it, I would do that. I think that's a big thing. They have professional readers in there, so I know that's always helpful to accompany kind of your internal voice as you read. So I would encourage you to do that first. Also on the left side here from the textbook, this is page 1203. I wanted to remind you that you have access to, this kind of preview or overview of each of the books before you read. So, book 10, we will be reading that next, obviously. This gives you a quick little summary. Book 11, book 12. So these all come from part 1. Read these just to give you a little heads up. You also have hopefully in your folder still from before break, when we were going to do the timelines, you have a handout that has summaries of every single book that you could also read, again, to give you kind of a little preview before you read the real thing. On page 1203 here, you also have some reading strategies for reading an epic poem. I'll remind you of these. Strategies for reading an epic are very similar to those for reading any narrative poem. Do what you need to keep track of events. Visualize the imagery that's there for you. Notice the figurative language. Notice the epic similes and how they make the story more vivid and interesting. When you see those epic conventions, the light bulb should go off. Hey, this is something that's important. Read difficult passages more than once or listen more than once as you read. And use the side notes. I talked about this in yesterday's video. Use those side notes, things in the margin to help in comprehension. Also read it aloud to yourself if you need to, as it was originally conveyed. So these are all things that might help. So for book 9, I'm going to skip ahead here. And I'm just going to go through this study guide on the right and then kind of help with some of the answers and see if it helps with your understanding of book 9. After you're done with this whole video, I will give you the chance to retake a second time the quiz for book 9 after having listened to this. Hopefully it'll help you and you can improve your score. I'll take the top score between the two. One thing to note, this is abridged, so make sure you're reading the italicized part. That should be kind of a breath of fresh air when you see the parts that are in italics, because it's a summary. It's not written in the original language. It should be a little bit easier. It's not in poetic lines. It should be easier to understand. So as we get to book 9, remember that this is him finally talking about Odysseus, finally talking to a king, and we were dropped in the middle of this whole thing. Now here in book 9, we're finally hitting the rewind, and he's talking about what exactly happened for him to get to this point, to get to this king's island. All right, so when the Odyssey, here's question 1. When the Odyssey begins, Odysseus is talking to King Alcinous of Phaeacia. Find one passage in which Odysseus expresses his great longing to return home to Ithaca and write the lines here. I picked lines 24 and 25 here. Where shall a man find sweetness to surpass his own home and his parents? To me, that answers that question as he begins to tell his story, and after he reveals himself to be Odysseus, he then talks about and refers to the fact that he really misses his home. Next, and this is a question that I know we missed quite a bit on the quiz. Where did Odysseus start the long journey about which he is telling King Alcinous? Okay, so you're going to find that right here. This is italics. This is actually not in the poetic language, so it should be a little bit easier to understand. He started this long journey in Troy, right? Odysseus explains that soon after leaving Troy, he and his crew land near Ismarus, the city of the Cicones. Okay, the Cicones are allies, so they were friends of the Trojans who Odysseus and his men had just beaten, so they were enemies to Odysseus. Odysseus and his crew raided the Cicones, robbing and killing them until an army killed 72 of Odysseus's men, and drives the rest out to sea. So when we see that, how did they attack, or why did they attack, the Cicones attack Odysseus and his men? It was because they had allegiance to the Trojans. When they escape there are some benches that are empty, right? There are some benches that are empty from Odysseus's ships, right? So why is that? Well, the reason is right here. 72 men had been killed. That's why some of those rows are empty. Odysseus and his men then land on the coastline of the Lotus Eaters. So that's this quick little part right here in Book 9. Why does Odysseus send 3 men ashore? He does that because he wants to learn more about the people who live there, right? So he sent 2 picked men and a runner to learn what race of men that land sustained. So he wants to learn about the people who are from this island before everybody gets off to learn about the Lotus Eaters. The primary recreation of these people, the land of the Lotus Eaters, all right, they ate the honeyed plant, the lotus. And when they ate it, okay, you never cared to report or return. You want to stay forever, browsing on that native bloom, forgetful of the homeland. So anybody who eats this plant, lotus, forgets about their home and just wants to stay there. Okay, so that's number 7. That's the danger to the men in the land of the Lotus Eaters. And so Odysseus is able to rescue his men from the danger by basically forcefully putting them back onto the ships, okay, tying them to the benches, and have everybody leave, right? And so the qualities of being a hero that he reveals, that I would say in this part, he saves his men, he shows loyalty to them, he didn't leave them behind, and he shows resourcefulness in that he ties them to the bench to get out of there, and also caution, right? He showed caution at the beginning, not letting everybody just jump onto the land of the Lotus Eaters, but sending a few people in the first place to check them out. Okay, that brings us to the Cyclops, right? So the Cyclops is the big part of Book 9. Okay, first impressions of the Cyclops as you read this, right? That next we were in the land of the Cyclops, and they were giants, okay? One-eyed giants. Use pictures, use some of your background knowledge to this stuff to help you understand it. And so these were these men, these Cyclops, who basically dwelled in his own mountain cave, so that each of these Cyclops just hung out by themselves. So they were very solitary. They dealt out rough justice to wife and child, right? So that they weren't afraid to be mean or be horrible to anybody, women and children alike, right? So it tells you how nasty these Cyclops were, these solitary monsters, essentially. Okay, and so Odysseus and his men, again, here's that quick little summary. They come upon a cave, okay, and you get then, all right, talking about, let's see, what is a Cyclops like? We talked about that, and so here we go. They get aboard, and this talks about them finally getting to the cave, right? To this guy that lived there by themselves, and we're talking about the Cyclops here. Okay, so let's move on. Why does he interrupt his telling of the adventure to describe in great detail the goat skin of wine? So they get to the cave, they talk about it, and all of a sudden here they talk about this goat skin full of sweet liquor that Euanthes' son Maron had given me. So this whole description here, all right, and the reason why he talks about this wine, when it seems kind of out of the ordinary, something like that, starting on line 96. That's an example of foreshadowing, right? So you should kind of make a hint as a good reader. Okay, I need to know that this wine is going to be significant at some point later in this story, right? So they talk about bringing that and finally getting up to the cave. Okay. Against his men's advice, Odysseus refuses to leave before the Cyclops returns to the cave. What is his reason for doing that? Okay. Basically, he wants to see the Cyclops. That's his thing, and we'll talk more about this, right? It's this idea that the men, they all want to just get out of there and take some stuff, and instead Odysseus, his ego, his pride, that's one of his flaws, and he just wants to be able to say he saw a Cyclops. As a result, he puts his men into danger, and that's not a good thing as a leader, right? One of the laws of the ancient Greek society is courtesy to strangers. So Polyphemus, who is the Cyclops, what does he do to defy this law? He basically does not treat them well. Greek society says that you should be courteous to people and welcome them as a host, and he does not do that. Okay, and so we see that instead, as he goes through here, all right. I'll try and here's where the Cyclops comes across them. Strangers, who are you and where are you from? Okay, and basically they try to tell him, okay, where they came from and how they ended up here, and instead, instead of being hospitable, okay, he instead then just grabs a couple of them, right? And here's like an epic simile, 193. He caught two in his hands like squirming puppies to beat their brains out, spattering the floor. Dismembered them, made his meal, gaping and crunching like a mountain lion. So this is a description of him meeting several of the men, obviously not being a good host. Okay, and so right away, his heart beat high now at the chance of action, and after the Cyclops went to sleep, he went and was going to go stab him, basically kill him. The problem is this ponderous doorway slab. So there's this huge rock in the way of the door that only the Cyclops could move, and as a result, they have to find a way to make sure that door is opened before they seek revenge on the Cyclops so that they can still leave the cave. Okay? And so the idea is, all right, and here is the means in which I would serve my turn. This is the plan that he puts together, right? As far as the main points of the plan, okay, it is they're going to get the Cyclops drunk on that wine. They're going to sharpen a stick, all right, and basically poke the Cyclops in his one eye so he's blind, and then they are going to escape once they've done that, right? So what do they do to Polyphemus? They blind him, okay? So this is where you started reading yesterday, or excuse me, this is what you finished today, and then took the quiz, talking about Monday. You were to finish after line 243, and so they waited. The plan went according to what they wanted it to, right? So they starting here, start to get him drunk, okay? He eats a couple other men, okay? And then at that point, there's also this trick here where the Cyclops keeps wanting to know the men, right? Wants to know what specifically Odysseus's name is. So let me keep going along this here. Odysseus's men, they get him drunk. They stab him in the eye, and the other Cyclops don't help Polyphemus because of this trick, right? That this trick that he called himself Nobody. Odysseus did. He said his name was Nobody. So when the Cyclops is blinded and he heads out and he yells to all the other Cyclops to help him, they say, what's wrong? All right, why don't you help him? And he says, nobody, nobody hurt me. And so it was a little play on words that Odysseus used. Okay, the trick then that Odysseus uses to free his men and himself from the cave, there's these little these sheep that the Cyclops herds, and the Cyclops got to let them out the next morning so that they can get outside of the cave. And so what the men do is they all tie themselves underneath. Okay, each of those they tie themselves underneath each of the sheep. And that way, when the blind Cyclops feels each of the sheep, he doesn't know there's a man underneath it, and so they all get out. And so the ram, the biggest of the lot, is the one that Odysseus goes underneath. Okay, and so we see, like with number 20, once they're safely out and out to sea, Odysseus yells back that they made it out. He boasts of his true identity, tells them that it's Odysseus that just defeated this Cyclops. And so Polyphemus then asks Poseidon, his dad, the god of the seas, to make it more difficult for Odysseus to return home. So that pride that Odysseus has in kind of bragging back to the Cyclops, it backfires. Polyphemus throws like some rocks that almost capsize the boat that Odysseus is in. And so Odysseus was clever, yet at the same time, he also put his men in danger and wasn't a great leader because his pride got in the way of, clearly thinking, and so some men ended up dying. This epithet that the poet often attaches to the name of the goddess of dawn, we see it a bunch, but anytime, let me find one here. Anytime it's morning, you'll see this, when the young dawn with fingertips of rose lit up the world. All right, and you hear that a couple different times. Whenever you hear that when dawn spread out her fingertips of rose, picture this god or goddess who would lift the sun up all right, in the east every morning. And think about a sunrise, how sometimes right before the sun comes up, it's kind of like pink before you get the yellow of the sun. The Greeks explained their world by saying that it was a goddess, Dawn, who was actually putting the sun in her fingertips and lifting it up each year or each day. And so that's the epithet there that helped them to explain the goddess of dawn. So there you go. Hopefully this is helpful going through the study guide, giving you some reminders of reading strategies. You can go and, as I said, take the quiz one more time, and I'll take your top score for a retake. That's the Monday quiz on Book 9. And in the future, again, email me if you have any questions. I can do more of these. I can answer your emails if you have specific questions. I can try and find other study guides for you. I'm here to help you to understand this difficult text. So hopefully this helped, and we will talk to you soon.